Hello and welcome to The Stack. This week we speak with Maxine Leonard from Beauty Papers, the editor of a title on the people and places of Phillip Island and San Remo, and also the complete visual record of the iconic British duo Pet Shop Boys. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show featuring a stunning magazine that redefined and expanded the way to cover beauty. The creative annual title chose Hollywood as its theme for their most recent issue. They're also celebrating a decade of their title, which is a celebration of beauty, art, and culture. It was a pleasure to welcome to our studio publisher and editor-in-chief of Beauty Papers, Maxine Leonard.
We look at the pillars of beauty, art and culture. So my business partner is Valerie, so we are the founders. Mm-hmm. And I think at the time we both aligned, kind of feeling that the industry was in a bit of a cul-de-sac, and we wanted to create a vehicle, being both obsessed by print, that really looked at play, provoke, confuse, amuse and inspire. So using beauty as a tool, but looking and leaning into art and culture.
And you've been early on spot on in the sense to see a magazine as something collectible, as something beautiful and unique. I think that's how people are perceiving print these days in a way, right?
I think print's really important. Mm-hmm. I think to pick up something that's tangible and physical and to have that space to really observe the storytelling is now more than ever imperative. I think we live on our phones too much, and I think this concept that print's dead is not what we've seen with Beauty Papers. I mean, we don't do many vehicles a year, but we have a strong core niche audience that really appreciate print and the product that is Beauty Papers.
And the photography is something quite inviting, you know, there are a lot of kind of close-ups. I think this is something quite, that's what I also love about.
I love a bit of macro.
We like a little bit of macro. And I have here in front of me the latest issue, which is the Hollywood issue. I mean, the topic is there. I mean, it's such an interesting topic.
There was a lot to play with.
Yes.
Yeah, and have fun with as well. I mean, it's observational. We've got Bruce Gilden in there, who's a documentary photographer, who takes what one might perceive as quite brutal portraits, but actually really understanding Bruce's work. They're very tender, and they're of, I suppose, individuals that don't necessarily maybe fit within the traditional norms of society. Mm-hmm. And then we've got a looky-likey in there, which is quite fun, which was Taylor Swift. And then obviously we collaborate with Jake Chapman, and we created Placebo, which was pills for Hollywood, which was fun, which was a product that came with this edition. And beauty stories, and working with Cate Blanchett as well.
That was a fabulous cover as well,
yeah.
Cate Blanchett.
It was really poignant that Cate Blanchett came back, because she was our first real celebrity cover, because for 5 years we didn't work with celebrity. And so for the 10th, Cate coming back was very special to us.
And it's a magazine, I mean, of course, it looks expensive, you know, it is something that is made with... It is, right?
It is.
It is, right? But that's a big part. But because you also do that together, you have a creative agency.
We do,
that you work together. How do you work together with both of them?
Well, this edition is special to us also because with BPCC, which is Beauty Papers Creates Consults, our agency, that both Valerie and I founded together, in this edition, in the landscape of traditional advertising, all of the ads that we have created are bespoke ads. We've never taken traditional advertising, and that was because we didn't want rules or overlords. I mean, it's not necessarily the best business model, but it gave us the freedom that we really wanted. But in this edition, we've worked with the brands that we've got long-standing relationships with and created bespoke ads for them. So they sit in print. So there's MAC, there's Byrodo, there's Dries Van Noten. We work with Jimmy Choo, Roxanda, who's also a friend of the family and important to us. We created ads for her. That was really great to see what has that traditional format of advertising but is unique to Beauty Papers and to the brand's audience as well. And BPCC works with brands in print but also outside, so content from campaignable imagery to podcast to audio to film to experiential. So that is our agency, yeah.
During this decade, what has changed in your role at Beauty Papers, do you feel? In the sense, have you grown, in terms of circulation, or you prefer actually to keep it small, because it is a beautiful product and perhaps, I know you have a large online presence as well.
No, circulation's strong. We globally distribute. It will be cover dependent in a way in how many we look at printing. Everything is very bespoke at Beauty Papers. I think maybe what's changed is obviously we have to feed Instagram. That's important. I just think there's so much on there in a way. And what I feel is changing is that in the world that we're living in today, that magazines will really reclaim the space that they truly once had as being sources of information, and to spend time with imagery and to really observe and read. I think that's really important. I think magazines will become strong platforms in which people will start to really source from more.
Are you a big reader of, not only magazines, but magazines about fashion in general, or not really, or perhaps you're a big kind of literature journals, I don't know.
I love magazines. Yeah. I think anyone that goes to print is such an achievement, and I know how much work they take. They are tenacious things.
So tell us, because when you started working in the beauty industry, right?
I did. I was a makeup artist. Yeah.
You're a makeup artist.
I used to be, yeah. So I trained in Japan with Shuemura.
Oh, wow.
And then came back and started assisting. And so I was a makeup artist for about 15 years.
That's fantastic. And are you there in the sets, kind of looking at the makeup? So,
no.
Not anymore. Now you're leaving. Now you're happy with your job as a publisher. And
yeah, no. I think the creative direction was just a very natural thing. We work with the world's leading talent, so I wouldn't dream of interfering. They may contradict me on that, but no, I don't pick up a brush anymore.
Oh, yeah. What a shame. Maybe you should try again sometime.
Maybe there's a reason why I had to put it down.
Exactly. And again, I was looking at your website. You don't only sell the magazine. There's a lot of kind of limited edition products. And I think they're very particular to every issue. So I think that's super interesting. I wonder if you can tell us some of them from the Hollywood issue.
So the Hollywood issue was Jake Chapman, which was placebo pills. And we did a lucky dip. And inside 20 of the pills, you could, if you were lucky enough to win, a silver skeleton sculpture. So that was artifact number 2. So artifact is where we do our products. The first product that we launched was with Maggie Hambling, who we adore. And we created 3 solid silver sculptures. And inside the cavity of the sculptures was an indigo lash paint, which was the colour that Maggie uses a lot in her art. But the lash paint was really about also a celebration of Maggie's kind of cloggy lashes that were inspired by Dusty Springfield. And those 3 sculptures were sold at Art Basel in Hong Kong. And that was really looking about redefining the territories of beauty and Beauty Papers coming into that art world a little bit more. And Jake Chapman, who's been collaborating with us for the last 9 years, that was our second product.
And if you don't mind me asking about the beauty industry in general, I mean, in the last decade since you launched the Beauty Papers, do you think anything has changed in a significant way, perhaps for the positive in your view, or maybe not really?
Has it changed? Maybe not enough.
Not enough.
Maybe not enough. I think there's definitely been much more open conversation in being celebratory of all, which is really positive. But I still personally have a slight frustration in the imagery, maybe sometimes the messaging. I think could be a little bit more maybe provocative, but obviously it's striking that balance between art and commerce.
Well, that's what you're doing at Beauty Papers. That's why we need a platform like
Trying.
And as I said, it's interesting that even after a decade, it's still quite unique in its place in the newsstand in a way. There are not many magazines like that cover this particular angle in that sense.
I think because it is the 3 angles of beauty, art and culture, I think each kind of, and also their theme. So we really look at that theme and break it down into the minutiae and pull and draw from all aspects of what it means or what we think it means or how we can play. And I think play is really important.
I have a question because I've been talking to a lot of editors. Of course, you have a big presence on Instagram. How do you talk to your readers in a way of having a community? Do you do events or, because I know sometimes you launch issues on art fairs and
we've done a lot of events. We've collaborated with brands for events and The experiential, I'd love to focus a little bit more on, actually. I think as individuals, we crave that, don't we? We need that kind of...
More and more, I
think so, yeah, definitely. We don't talk to our audience on Instagram, though. We've taken off all of the comments.
That's fine. I think that's a wise idea, if I may say.
Yeah.
At Monocle, we're not there as well. Sometimes we have some imagery, but sometimes it can become a bit toxic for nothing.
A little bit, I think. And I think also the power of visual imagery is how subjective it is. You might look at something and find it violent, and I might look at something and find it tender. And so I really want the audience to draw their own conclusion without the perversion of maybe reading a toxic comment or somebody else's opinion. And so you can like or not like, it's there. But we shut the comments down.
Thank you very much, Maxine. For more information and to buy their latest issue, go to beautypapers.com. And as everyone that knows me, I'm a huge fan of the Pet Shop Boys. Honestly, they were one of the reasons I wanted to move to London. Their music is just beautiful. So I'm very happy about a new book published by Thames and Hudson. It is documenting their complete visual record, from album sleeves, videos, stage sets. Honestly, it's a Bible for Pet Shop Boys fans and design aficionados. It was a pleasure to welcome Chris Heath to our studio, author of the book Pet Shop Boys Volume, The Complete Visual Record. He tells me more about his connection with the duo and more.
Cause we will never be here more rain. We had too much time to find for ourselves, and we will never be here more rain. We dressed up with thoughts and thought to make amends.
When I came to London, my first job, the end of 1984, was at Smash Hits magazine. And the features editor was Neil Tennant. He was temporarily one of my bosses. But the Pet Shop Boys were, had already started. And sometimes at the end of the day, Chris would come in and kind of sit waiting for Neil, and then he'd go off to rehearse. So you kind of knew that Neil had this band. And then, a few months later, he left because they'd signed to EMI, to Parlophone. Then I started writing about them, and we kind of never really stopped. I've had a very different life doing all kinds of other writing. But we've carried on doing things periodically for over 40 years.
So there was a connection there from the beginning, and he was your boss. And a book like this, I'm sure you would agree with me as well, Chris, that not every band, no matter how many years they would have such a book, in a way, because they wouldn't have enough material. But they do have that, right?
No, I think it's extraordinary. It's interesting writing the material in that I think for a lot of groups, they might have great visuals, because it's not just about design and visuals, though a huge amount of it is, and this incredible long-running collaboration they've had with Farrow Design, but it's also about their stage shows, their videos, and they do have a career where they have collaborated and done truly interesting and valuable things in all these different forms with so many different people, that it's almost hard to fit it all in. Writing it, you're never stretching for something to say. Every single thing has got something really worthwhile and interesting to say, and then you look at it on the page, and it kind of looks both looks great, but it's also kind of fascinating.
And even, I believe, the very first single, featured here was the West End Girls, right? And even that cover, it looks so current, it looks so beautiful. And I think even they have T-shirts celebrating that in a way. So I think there was always a certain freshness about the design as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, obviously a lot of that is the collaborators that they've worked with, but it's they have an incredible aesthetic and instinct. Big driver of what they've done is an instinct not to do what everyone else has been doing. And I think that comes through a lot and has driven a lot of what makes this still interesting to look at and read about all these years later.
And this book must taken quite a long time because, I think just so people understand, the Pet Shop Boys fan, it is about 600-page book and it's quite detailed. And you have from the rarest single to the very famous ones that we all know.
Yeah, it's incredibly detailed, but at the same time, and I genuinely think, there's a precursor to this book called Catalogue about 18 years ago, which covered things up to that point. And that was very much presented as a deluxe art book, large format, coffee table. This book very deliberately isn't. It's very deliberately created as a book in a book shape and readable book. This isn't some precious kind of art project. I think that anybody with even some quite general interest in this would pick up this book and start reading it and hopefully wouldn't stop. That's the hope.
I definitely agree. It's not just for the fans,
Yeah.
you know. And one thing I like towards the end, and again, this is quite unique, that they're involved with the annually, which is kind of a, you know, it's their annual. It looks like a magazine in a way. And I find it so interesting to have that relationship with fans. I think it's so nice when you have something in print in your hands, not just online in a way as well, right?
Well, yes, I mean, that's something we've done together. It used to be a magazine called Literally, and now it's an annual hardback book called Annually. You know, it's a lot of work for all of us, them even more than me. But I think we all like the idea of doing something way too well, if that's not sort of weird to say, and just to carry on doing it. And yeah, it's funny. I don't know what people perceive of it, but it's like I think of it as this sort of very worthwhile, sort of 40-year-long kind of art project.
I agree. And it looks like it. I mean, this is a bit of a difficult question, but from all the design, was there an era that really stuck with you, especially, you know, more relating to the book in terms of design? And it's weird. I can tell you mine, so it gives you time to think. Like, because my first discovery of the Pet Shop Boys was around mid-90s with bilingual, you know, that it was very clear yellow. But, you know, I was a young child in Brazil and that was my first interaction. So that's very special to me. But I know it's not the most iconic, perhaps, but I wonder what's your...
Yeah, it's interesting. I think because I've been close by for nearly all of it, and maybe I don't think of it quite like that. So you know, but I think what struck me, you know, doing Volume, you sort of hadn't thought of it all collected together, and their late 80s work is the stuff that people go back to most typically as most iconic. I remember at the beginning of this, you sort of have half a thought, well, what's these extra 17 years we're adding on? How are they going to match up to it? And just maybe even for a quarter of a thought, is it going to feel like it tails off? And it so doesn't. And I think that's what I find really interesting, is that they've carried on finding inventive and interesting ways, visually and other ways, to just keep doing a different kind of version of what they do, which is to make things interesting and special and unique.
It's interesting how they managed to still be part of the cultural conversation after so many years. Of course, you know, ups and downs, mainly ups, I would say. And that's very rare. I mean, as I said, 40 years. What's the secret? Do you think that attention to detail, that kind of attention to craft, being music or what they dress on stage, is part of all that?
There are ups and downs, but I think sticking to... Firstly, I think being genuinely interested and inspired by what you're doing and caring about doing something new and wanting to do something new, that's the strongest thing. And there's a big push when you've been around for a long time to slide into nostalgia. And a lot of people do that, and there are good economic reasons for doing it. And they've never done that. I guess you could say they've done a greatest hits tour in the last 2 or 3 years. But even that is fantastically contemporary and has stuff going through the whole of their career. One of the threads through this book, which is a thread through their career, is constantly finding new ways of exploring things, so that along the way they do a ballet, they do a musical, they have something else that's a long gestating project that will be coming out, I think, later this year. They're constantly finding interesting new ways of expressing things. They don't do what some groups do, which is like, oh, we need to do a big high energy record because that's whatever.
And, you know, I'm always scared of people that I'm a fan and say, oh, they're going to do an album only with acoustic ballads or something like that. But no, the Pet Shop Boys, they come with a proper disco, not disco, but like an album for the dance floor, especially the more recent ones. And I love that. And I think you're very right, that freshness in a way, right?
They might do an album of acoustic ballads at some point, and I think it'd probably be kind of great. But I
mean, with Neil's voice, probably would be great.
You know, but, you know, I mean, I think this isn't really about the Pet Shop Boys, it's general. Most people who are doing special, interesting things, the key of it is that they're still interested in what they do and care about what they do. And that sounds kind of banal, but it's not banal, because a lot of people, and not even in creative fields, you know, you slip away from that And you can feel that, but you can feel the opposite. You can feel when people are still like that.
And of course, in the book, there's also an interview you've done, kind of a continuation of an interview you've done years ago. I love that part. How was it? I mean, probably you have a friendship relationship with both of them, but I love the answers. Both Neil and Chris is not banal. It's really deep, you know. And if you ask then a question about a song, I love that, and it's so unusual.
No, what I remember being a little apprehensive thinking of doing the second interview, which, you know, is 16, 17 years after the previous one. But just thinking like, oh, did we say it all, or did they say it all on these kind of subjects back then? And we start talking. And what's interesting to me is, you know, I know them very well and I spend a lot of time with them. But as soon as I start talking to them like that, they're saying things to me that I've never heard them say that are truly fascinating. That's the conversation we have. That's there in the book. And I hope people will be interested. I was interested.
I love that. And of course, you're going to the gig next week, I presume, right?
I'll go to a couple of them, yeah.
I'm very excited for that one because, again, it's something different, right? No, it's something that they never done it before, in a way.
It's something that's sort of talked about over the years is what if we did some shows where we play play songs that we don't normally play. You know, play B-sides, album tracks. And of course, logistically, it's an incredible amount of work. And maybe you worry that... you know, that if you don't communicate it well enough to people are going to come and be like, where's Go West? Where's West End Girls? But no, I think it's going to be amazing. And I think most Pet Shop Boys fans have a sort of secret list of songs that they would love to hear and probably think they were never going to get the chance to hear live. Of course, ironically, there's so many of those that they can only play a fraction of them.
But they're very kind to the fans. They always release like the B-sides, the special singles, you know, that's, we like that in a way.
Well, I think being kind to the fans and expressing yourself fully artistically dovetail with each other because they've got all these songs that they want people to hear. So it goes both ways.
And Chris, just, you know, in general, besides this fantastic book, you are a great writer as well, and you just don't write only about music. Right?
No.
So you had amazing pieces. So anything else you would like to mention that you're working at the moment?
Well, I mean, again, most of my career has been writing nonfiction, magazine writing in America. So it's quite a different world to this. And so I carried on doing that. I mean, I had a very, very different book out about 18 months ago called No Road Leading Back, which is a very serious book about some episodes during the Holocaust in Lithuania. For me, it's driven by the same impulse of wanting to write seriously about important things in the world. I don't consider this not that at all. From the outside, I think people think pop music and then deep, dark history are very different. But the kind of magazine writing I do in America is about all kinds of dark, serious things sometimes. And then I'm also, in the right circumstance, very interested to have an interesting conversation with a musician or an actor. For me, it's the same impulse.
I agree. That's beautiful. Listen, Chris, thank you so much. I was going to ask which song you want them to play on the gig, but I think you might know too much to answer this question.
I do, yes. To be honest. But tell me what you'd like them to play.
Okay.
But I'm not going to give any reaction.
Well, I would love, but then again, it's too niche. I would love something like Discoteca from the Bilingual album, something like a not known track from that album. That would be excellent.
Call the police, there's a madman around, running down underground to a dive bar in a West End town. In a West End town, a dead end world, with the East End boys and West End girls. In a West End town, a dead end world, with the East End boys and West End girls. West End girls.
Thank you very much, Chris. Pet Shop Boys Volume, the complete visual record, is out now on the 7th of April. And what is your favorite Pet Shop Boys song? And finally on the show, a recommendation from Monocle's Andrew Muller. It's a beautiful magazine called The Island. The title is dedicated to the people and places of Phillip Island and San Remo. They just published their autumn issue. It was a pleasure to discuss local journalism with their editor, Eleanor McKay.
Phillip Island is actually right at the bottom of Victoria. We're probably the closest part of Australia to Tasmania. It's a tiny little place. We're about 2 hours out of Melbourne. So I moved down here about 20 years ago. So by island standards, that means I'm still a newbie. There's a lot of people who are, fourth or fifth generation. And so us people who just arrive, we're kind of fly-by-nighters.
Well, but you play a very important role for the community. I have here in my hands The Island magazine, which is a beautiful kind of, it kind of features people that live in the island. It's a really, really interesting magazine. I wonder if you can introduce for us, for how long has it existed and its role in the community in general? Because as you said, it's a very small community, but it's great that you have such a beautiful print title as well.
Yeah, so I think this week we put out our 13th edition.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been going since the summer of 2022. And the initial, we also actually run the local paper. And it's owned by a local family. It's very small. I think we've got a team, the equivalent of about 4 full-time people. So we do the local paper. And coming out of COVID, Victoria had really harsh lockdowns in COVID. They were really severe. I think some of the harshest in the world. And while the island was a little better, because living somewhere where they say you can only go 5 kilometres from your home, 500 metres from my home I can go to the beach. So it wasn't too bad being in lockdown. But because we're a holiday destination, it hit our community really hard. So a lot of businesses went to the wall. So we came out of COVID and we were feeling like we wanted to do something that would sort of celebrate the community and maybe give something back, because that's the hard thing as you would know, when you work in media, you're chasing ads all the time. So we thought we wanted to try and do something that just focused on the amazing people who lived there. And we decided to make it free because we wanted to, give back to the community. While other magazines are maybe defined around a theme or a topic of interest, ours is very much geographically defined. So we talk to all sorts of people and cover all sorts of things, but they have to have some connection to Phillip Island.
And I have a question for you as well, because doing here the stack, I've been hearing, especially when it comes to local press, there's been many cuts around the world. I'm talking here about the UK, the US, and other countries that I hear from. Do you see that challenge in Australia as well? And even with that challenge, of course, there are always wonderful exceptions, which I think that's what we want to hear, those positive stories as well.
It's very challenging in Australia. We don't have a large media landscape here, so the mainstream media is very dominated by, I think, maybe 3-4 companies. And when you get into newspapers, I mean, they're a dying breed all over the world, and Australia is no different. But to their credit, the Australian government and the Victorian government have really made some big commitments to try and keep independent local media alive, because, I mean, I'm not telling you what you wouldn't know, but for places like us, if there isn't a local media, those stories don't get told at all. So the bigger media, they're focusing on the metropolitan areas. And so it really has to be a disaster down here before the major media even pay any attention to us. Part of the way government has been supporting independent media is to also, they encourage you to do things where you might be able to use your content in multiple ways. So there's been a lot of funding where, they've allowed us to develop digitally, which up until 2020, I don't think the newspaper didn't even have a website at that point. That's how old school it was. And one of the things that we were able to do was to actually get some government funding to start the magazine, and then we used, we cross-pollinated. So where we had big feature stories in the magazine, we were able to cut them down into smaller stories and put them in the newspaper. So it was a way of providing a bit more employment for people. It was a way of cross-pollinating with the newspaper. And it was also what we found was that where we live, there's a lot of retired people here. So old people read newspapers, but young people don't. That's not how they get their news. But what we really found was that there was this age group, which was probably more in the 30s and 40s, who did not read the paper, but they were very happy to sit and flick through a magazine. We kind of picked up a new audience because, ultimately we could see that our actual newspaper audience was dying. quite literally. So the paper was getting smaller and smaller, but by doing this magazine, we've actually opened the newspaper up to a whole new audience.
That's so interesting that you opened up. It's just people that perhaps never thought, I should get the paper, but then they see this kind of beautiful product, this magazine, and it's very interesting actually.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things we found with it is that people, because we are a holiday area, people slow down a bit when they're on holidays. And so where, you're running around in the city, you might not pick up a magazine and flip through it, but when you're on holidays and you're sitting at the beach or you're in a coffee shop, you are more likely to pick up a magazine as opposed to just scrolling through something online. So I think that has worked in our favour. And I also think the fact being that holiday area also makes the people who live there full time very protective of what they see as the real community. So having a magazine that is literally just talking about them kind of struck a chord. Most small towns have a kind of fierce identity, but I feel like when you're on an island, because you are literally completely isolated from everywhere else, it's like that community pride on steroids. And I think the magazine fed into that really well.
I wonder, Eleanor, if you could give us just a little taster of some of the stories in the new issue. As you said, there's a new issue that just came out. I believe it's the autumn issue there. Just a little taster so people can understand what they can read at the island.
Yeah. So, like one of the stories we talk about, well, we actually interviewed a man who's quite well known here. His name's Matt Botel, and he's a brilliant engineer. And when he was made redundant from Toyota, it was probably 10 years ago, he was actually offered a job with Elon Musk, but instead he came home and he's established this not-for-profit where he makes what he calls assistive devices for people. So he makes hands. He uses 3D printers to make limbs for hands. I think he's doing arms now. And he particularly focuses on children because he was saying he realised that making these devices, normally they cost millions of dollars. And because kids grow, they keep growing out of them. So it's incredibly expensive if you've got a child that needs an assistive hand, you might have to replace that 4 or 5 times. And, they're costing millions. So Matt worked out how to make these devices using everyday materials. And then once he worked out the design, he then put the designs out on the web so anyone could make them. So he's really quite extraordinary. So he's one of the stories in this new edition. So you've got someone like that who is actually quite high profile and very high achieving. And then, one of our other stories is a young guy. He's a local tattoo artist, but he runs ultra marathons. And last year he decided he would like to try and raise some money for Matt's charity, which is called Free 3D Hands. And he went, I'm going to run around the island, which is 110 kilometres. I'm going to do it in a day. I'm going to try and raise, I think his initial target was, I'm going to raise $2,000 for them. And he ended up raising $28,000 by doing this running around the island in one day. So it's sort of like two ends of the spectrum, just the average guy who lives there who goes, I want to help this charity, and then this sort of freakishly brilliant guy who has created this worldwide, it's not a company because he doesn't really make any money out of it. He exists completely on charity. People make donations and that's how he keeps the whole thing running. So that's 2 stories just from this edition.
That's fantastic. And
at the other end, you've got kind of crazy stories like a retired engineer who has the most insane model train set up in his back shed. So we're highbrow and lowbrow and everything in between, really.
And I love the wildlife stories because I have the previous issues as well. And of course, this being Australia, I'm sure you have quite an interesting and unique wildlife scene as well, right?
Yes, we do. And Phillip Islands is probably most famous for its penguins. So we have the penguin parade here. And so consequently, we do actually have a crazy amount of scientists who live here who are experts in penguins and wallabies. And in fact, one of the stories in this edition is with a woman who's an expert in dolphins and whales, and she helped found the Phillip Island Whale Festival, which happens in July every year now. So, there's a lot of a lot of wildlife. It's not uncommon for us to go for a walk and see a couple of wallabies as we're walking down to the beach, which is, you never get tired of it. It's beautiful.
Oh, I would love that. And Eleanor, just finally, you told me about the newspapers. Also, do you also work at the newspaper? So tell us what's your role there.
I'm the editor of the newspaper and of the magazine. So it's the same team work on both. And crazily enough, we actually only have 2 journalists, so me and our kind of senior journalist. And with the magazine, occasionally we get other people to write for us, but predominantly it's Sarah and I, and we do the whole thing, and we do the paper every week as well. So we take winter off, so we don't do a winter edition of the magazine, and that's kind of nice. So I'm having a bit of a deep, exhale right now because we've got the autumn one out and I don't have to do another one until September. So that's kind of nice.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. For more information, go to pisra.com.au. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks to our editor, Jack Dewars. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. And remember, we're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, you can always listen again at monocle.com and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. It's goodbye from me.